Recording is in progress. I just want to say thank you to everybody that is online. This is our hybrid meeting, and I want to thank everyone that's in the room as well. This meeting is, as you all know, the all-party group on no recourse to public funds. And we're here today to discuss the unacceptable problems of our children growing up in poverty due to their families being subject to no recourse to public funds condition, with particular reference to the important, fantastic report the Work and Pensions Committee have put together. I want to personally pay tribute to my colleague Stephen Timms for his hard work to use his chairmanship of the Work and Pensions Committee to raise awareness within the estate, and more importantly, asking the Prime Minister if he understood what no recourse to public funds actually is. So thank you for all your stellar work. But despite 1.4 million people being subject to these conditions, awareness amongst members of Parliament of what this puts people through remains very, very low. So we're grateful for his and his committee's work to hear the testimony of those with lived experience and the variety of organisations who are experts and campaigners on this issue. So we're really lucky to have a great set of speakers here today, including, do we still have contributions? Yes, we do, sorry. Including a couple of contributions from people who can speak to their own personal experience. So, as I've said, we have Stephen Timms MP, who is the MP for East Ham and also the chair of the Work and Pensions Committee. We have Olivia Housey, Associate Solicitor to the Public Law and Community Care Department at Gold Jennings. She has a varied practice in both public law and challenges the civil claims system against public authorities, and has developed a particular expertise in representing migrant families, migrant adults with care needs, and vulnerable young people, asylum seekers, and victims of trafficking in judicial review proceedings. We have Carrie Swan, a welfare rights advisor at the organisation Child Poverty Action Group. She works on the charity's early warning system, which collects evidence about emerging problems in the benefit system. We also have Nicola Masri, an immigration solicitor and a senior legal officer at Rights of Women. Rights of Women provides legal advice and assistance to migrant women who have experienced violence through specialist helplines. They also seek to influence change in the law, policy and practice to better protect migrant women. So rather than wasting any more time, we're going to move on to our agenda. So our first speaker is Stephen Timms. So Stephen, if I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for setting this meeting up, and thanks for the opportunity. I really welcome the opportunity to talk about what the Select Committee has recommended. And I know that Project 17 provides a secretariat for the all-party group that you chair, Kate. And so let me just express thanks to Project 17, to the Unity Project, to the Children's Society and to Citizens Advice, who all provided really helpful advice and evidence to the Select Committee in its inquiry. My focus on this area began, I think, really only at the start of the pandemic, when suddenly a large number of my constituents, their jobs came to an end because of lockdown, and they had no recourse to public funds, so they were completely stuck. They couldn't get any income or help at all. And that led to the exchange that you mentioned, Kate, with the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee in May 2020. And I told him about a couple that I know quite well, originally from Pakistan. They came to the UK as students. I think they were here on student visas for 7 or 8 years. Then they eventually got onto the 10-year track towards indefinite leave. By that time, they already had their 2 children. But of course, they're on the 10-year track for and they were completely stuck. So I explained that to the Prime Minister, and his response was, well, people in that situation, hardworking, law-abiding, should be entitled to help of some kind or another. And I completely agree with him about that. They should be able to get some help, but unfortunately, under the policies of his government, they didn't, and they don't. The question I think we might want to discuss, and I'm sure we will discuss today, is, what's the right response to this policy? And the very strong answer we got back in the evidence we received in our inquiry is scrap it. Just scrap the no recourse to public funds policy altogether. But I think actually we do need to be a bit more nuanced than that, because I don't think anyone is really arguing for a system in which people can claim benefits from the day of arrival in the UK. And the people that I'm talking about in my constituency certainly didn't come to the UK to claim benefits, they came to work. So I think we do need a more nuanced position than simply saying, let's scrap the whole idea. And what the Select Committee proposed was some much more modest changes, but changes which I think will make a big difference if they were implemented to a large number of families. And of course, these were proposals, recommendations made on a consensus basis by an all-party committee, the committee I chair, but a committee that's got a Conservative majority on it. And actually, it was one of the Conservative members who made the comment in responding to evidence that we heard from people. We listened to people who were in the position of having no recourse to public funds. She described that evidence as harrowing, and it was harrowing. I mean, the things that this policy has done to people are completely indefensible, I think, and that was the view of the committee members as a whole. So we made two recommendations in particular that I wanted to highlight today. The government's response to our report was published on Monday of this week, so everybody can now see it. And unfortunately, they have rejected both those major recommendations. But I think it is nevertheless worth our getting behind the recommendations that we made. And the two that I'm highlighting were, firstly, that the maximum period that families with children should be able to stay on no recourse to public funds should be 5 years at the most. And secondly, that the parents of children who are UK citizens, and that is the case for that Pakistani family that I referred to a minute ago, that I think both their children now are British citizens, that the parents should be receiving child benefit for their children, even if the parents themselves have no recourse to public funds. So those were the two kind of most substantial changes that we recommended. As I say, unfortunately, both of them now rejected by the government, but the committee will certainly want to return to that, and indeed there are various recommendations calling on the government to come back to us at various times, and so this is a topic that we're going to continue to look at. It's just worth, I think, running through other recommendations that we made, where in some cases the government's response was slightly more positive than their response to those two that I've highlighted. So the response does say that the Department for Education will consider updating the serious incidents notification system by adding a no recourse to public funds indicator to serious incident notifications. This was because we highlighted in our report evidence that there has been a trend of notifiable serious incidents in the care system where the families involved had no recourse to public funds. So I'm hoping that will be flagged up. I must say, the Department for Education has been more receptive on this issue than some other government departments. They very early in the lockdown agreed that families with no recourse to public funds should have access to free school meals. Their children should have access to free school meals. And of course, thanks to the work of Marcus Rashford, the benefits of that then carried on through the school holidays as well. And that, having introduced that for the pandemic, they then said they would review whether it should be made permanent. And we had a review which lasted for about 18 months. And I think what was happening was the Department for Education did want to make it permanent. The Home Office did not. That was what appeared to be going on as far as I could tell. And finally, as you know, in the end, it has now been confirmed that it's going to be permanent. So I think the Department for Education has taken a different view on this right from the start. And I welcome this, the acceptance of the recommendation on the serious incidents notification system. There were some warm words in the government's response, but unfortunately nothing specific on the extension of the support for migrant victims pilot. That's been trying out an improvement of the support of people who suffer domestic violence while having no recourse to public funds. We highlighted the need to improve support for childcare costs for working families with no recourse to public funds. I'm afraid there was nothing specific announced in the government's response on that. There was a commitment to review the publicity from the government explaining what people with no recourse to public funds are entitled to. We'll see what comes out of that, but I hope that might help at least communicate better some of the information about this. There was a commitment to further explore, and I'm quoting from the government's response, further explore data availability on no recourse to public funds and on migrant poverty, including on children in poverty, but there wasn't anything specific and there was no timetable for doing this. I mean, as you know, Kate, you mentioned the estimate that there are 1.4 million people at the moment in the UK with no recourse to public funds, including 175,000 children. That's a figure that's been calculated by the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, but the Home Office says that they've got no idea how many people there are. They have said they think probably that estimate is the best figure that's available, but it seems ridiculous to me that the Home Office can't even tell us how many people are given no recourse to public funds in a year. Surely they must know that or be able to tell us that, and so far they're not prepared to or wanting to do so. They are saying they will explore it further. They've confirmed in their response to suspension of the practice of moving people who are on the 5-year route to settlement onto the 10-year route when automatically when they make a change of condition application. They've suspended that. I hope that will become permanent, but they haven't made it permanent so far. They've refused to publish the minutes and records of the No Recourse to Public Funds Forum, which I think is a shame. I think they should be much more open about those discussions. And they've also refused to fund independent support for change of conditions applications, which the committee called for, because it's clear that lots of people, the great majority of people who do manage to make an application for change of conditions, do manage to get themselves exempted from no recourse to public funds. But most people with NRPF don't know you can do that. And if you do want to do it, you really do need some expert help, because it's a pretty complicated process, and people like Project 17, the Unity Project, Citizens Advice have been able to give that help very effectively. But for people who don't know about it, there's more needed, and we thought the government should fund that, as the government does now fund the Help to Claim service for universal credit delivered by Citizens Advice. They were not willing in their response to publish the review that's underway at the moment of a pilot for people who are refused change of conditions after they apply for it, to be able to appeal against the refusal. We thought that should be published. There is a willingness, it seems, on the part of the Home Office to provide more information about change of conditions applications. We've said that we'd like to know, how many of the people applying have children, a bit more of their kind of immigration history and so on. The Home Office says in principle they are willing to provide more information, but they haven't told us what additional information they will provide or when they will provide it. They've refused to carry out what we suggested, which was a cost-benefit analysis on the whole no recourse to public funds policy. That's arising from the research that's been published suggesting that actually the Exchequer would save money if people were allowed to apply for benefit instead of, as they very often have to do at the moment, depend on local authorities for support. And there wasn't anything specific either in the government's response in the direction of our call for extra funding for local authorities with large NRPF populations. So, one or two glimmers of a bit of progress on some of those points, but not really very much. But I do think there is a very strong case for the two recommendations that I highlighted at the start, that there should be a maximum period for families to be on no recourse to public funds. We suggested 5 years. I've seen suggested that it should be rather shorter than that. But I think 10 years is far too long, because, if you're on it for 10 years, then that means the children in the family will have spent most of their childhood in a situation of having no recourse to public funds. And Parliament has agreed that it's right to support children with child benefit, with other support, not in order to sort of give prizes to people, but because that support enables those children to flourish and to reach their full potential. And children who are in the UK for longer than 5 years, children who become UK citizens, they're here permanently. They're going to be part of Britain for the whole of their lives. So it's in everybody's interest that those children should be supported and enabled to flourish. And so I strongly think that both of those recommendations would be the right thing to do. I'm very disappointed that the government has said no, but I would welcome support for them arising from this discussion and elsewhere. Thank you, Kate, very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Everyone on the line and in the room, you will have an opportunity to ask Stephen some questions afterwards. I hope Stephen's able to stay.
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. And you're right. It's very disappointing to read the government's response to the recommendations. But if you could just quickly think about what we can do, those of us who are concerned, and what the next steps would be for the Select Committee in regards to the response that you've received.
Well, the government has agreed to come back to us on some of the points that we made in our report. So there will be, I think the first next bit of information we're expecting for the government will reach us in 3 months' time. So at that point, the committee will have another look at this and another opportunity to speak about it. But I think if the kind of recommendations that we've made could be promoted elsewhere in Parliament, if other MPs can table questions about the government's unwillingness to move in the directions we've called for, those kind of things, if the organisations at this meeting can lobby MPs to raise these points, then that would all be very, very helpful. And I think if there was sustained pressure on this coming widely from across the House, then we could see some significant progress in the direction that we've called for.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Stephen. Appreciate. So we're now going to move on to our next speaker, Olivia. Can I ask you, Olivia, can you please explain the legal challenges you have brought against public authorities on behalf of children and families with NRPF in order to avoid destitution, and what other challenges you see that may be on the horizon in view of this government's response to the recommendations in the inquiry?
Yeah, so I've been working at Gold Jennings for about 6 years now, and a big focus of the work that I've done is challenges brought on behalf of no recourse to public funds families. There's kind of 3 different categories of cases that I've been involved in that I'll kind of explain as I go through. So firstly, one of the types of challenges that we bring, just to be clear, we're bringing judicial review challenges. So that's looking at how public bodies are making decisions and whether they're lawful and that kind of thing. So the first type of case that we bring often on behalf of no recourse public funds families with children is where they've approached a local authority saying they're destitute, they require support, and that's been refused. So we look at whether, like, how that decision has been made, and we take steps to challenge that decision. Now, in those situations, often, in my experience anyway, my clients have been treated in a very aggressive manner by local authorities. And we call it the fraud approach. There's a bit of a kind of, the first step is thinking that the parents are lying or that their credibility should be questioned and trying to kind of pick holes in their story. Unfortunately, that kind of detracts from actually assessing whether a child is in need, which is part of the duty under Section 17 of the Children Act. And so even with support from charities like Project 17 and the other kinds of charities that are supporting this group of people, they find the assessment process very difficult to kind of navigate. So, you know, I've had clients who have been, you know, approaching local authorities. They've got nowhere to go that night, and saying, I need help. I need you to give me a place to stay. I need you to give me food so I can feed my baby. And they'll just say, well, you know, we don't believe you. And there's no kind of consideration of where are you going to stay today, or, you know, anything like that. There's just questions around, you know, evidence of destitution, things like that. But there's not kind of a approach of what does this child actually need. So a lot of our kind of cases are around challenging those decisions or refusals to provide support. And I have had cases before, I think right before, it was actually during the COVID lockdown on the 23rd of March 2020, where everything was shut and this woman was with her baby, British child, on the streets roaming around because she had nowhere to go. All the shops and restaurants and everything were closed, and she had been refused support, and that was because she hadn't provided a formal eviction notice to prove that she was destitute. But in these kind of communities where, you know, migrants are often helping each other, you know, you can stay on my couch for a couple of nights, stay on my couch for a couple of nights. There's not kind of a formal, you need to be evicted today, that kind of thing. So these kinds of decisions just aren't made in accordance with public law principles. You know, families aren't sufficient inquiries aren't made. Questions aren't put to family members about, you know, why there might be questions around what their credibility would be. And often, you know, I've had quite a few cases where the decisions are just irrational based on the evidence that's been provided. There's nothing that local authorities can point to say, oh, well, we don't think we should help you because of X, Y, Z. It's just, well, you haven't provided the treatment or something like that. Anyway, so we kind of have challenged those types of refusals, which can be very stressful for these families, and it can be, you know, going through a litigation process is very stressful, but it does take up, you know, local authorities' time, like the court's time, all that kind of thing, because it's so difficult to get the support in the first place. The second kind of challenges that we've brought as well is even when local authorities agree to provide support under Section 17, once they've done this assessment or whatever, often that support is not very sufficient. It's not very suitable to meet children's needs. There's a little bit of a kind of understanding that all local authorities need to be providing is sufficient, is equivalent to asylum support rates of support. So that's roughly, and I haven't checked the rates recently, well, today, but last time I checked, it was about £40 per person per week to live on. Now, the asylum support rates, the asylum support scheme is designed to avoid destitution and avoid a breach of human rights. Section 17 support is to promote the welfare of children in need in the local authorities area. That's often not what's being provided. That's often, you know, that's often kind of forgotten about. What's being provided is, oh, here's some money, you've got enough to eat, you can buy some toilet paper, that's enough. But what about, you know, these children, they need developmental toys, they need books, they need pens and paper for school, they need all these types of things. They're missing out on things like school trips, and parents are often skipping meals and kind of eking out shampoo and conditioner and body wash and that kind of stuff because they don't have enough money to meet their children's needs. And in these situations, you know, we have been able to you know, challenge local authorities and how much, like, what decisions they're making, because often what's happening is they're just kind of benchmarking, or they're just kind of deciding this is how much we'll give families. But that's not kind of assessed. Each individual child's needs aren't assessed. It's just kind of, oh, we'll go by this policy. So we've brought challenges around like the sufficiency and the suitability of subsistence that's provided and of accommodations. Often families are finding themselves in hostel rooms and hotel rooms where, you know, children don't have a place to sit down and do their homework. They don't have a place to play. They don't have any of that. And I think I saw in the report that there was evidence that had been given about how long families are on Section 17 support for. And it can be for years. It can be for 1.5 years, or it can be for 2 years, or whatever's happening whilst their immigration applications are pending. And so, you know, during that time, these children are suffering, really. Their needs, you know, we try our best to use litigation as a tool to make sure that local authorities are upholding their duties and they're acting in a lawful way. But I kind of dread to think how many families haven't had the support of Project 17 or charities and lawyers and that kind of thing to be able to challenge these things. That's another type of judicial review that we brought before and we've been successful in bringing. The other, you know, and just kind of running off that is those are in relation to like individual families where there's individual decisions being made. We also have brought in my experience, we've brought challenges against local authorities' policies where these are unlawful. So Section 17 is a discretion of a local authority, and they've got discretion in how it's a power. They've got discretion in how they exercise that power. We've seen there's been occasions, you know, where local authorities have policies that kind of fetter that discretion. So they kind of operate a blanket policy. So we'll only provide you support if you can prove that you're destitute. But that's not what the legal test is. We've been successful in challenging things like that, or saying we're only going to provide £40 per person per week to every family we support under Section 17. Again, that's not exercising the discretion in a lawful way, because it's not considering a case-by-case basis and understanding how that works. The other types of challenges that our firm have brought is more on a kind of wider scale to central government schemes that are in operation. So some examples, I mean, Stephen Kim's was talking about the free school meals at the beginning of lockdown. Initially, from what I understand, this case was not mine, this was by colleague Rachel's, but from what I understand, initially that wasn't going to be extended to families with real recourse to public funds. And we sent a pre-action letter to challenge the fact that no recourse to public funds families were excluded from that scheme. And we've done a few of those types of challenges. Also with pupil premium, the 2-year-old nursery scheme, and a Healthy Start scheme as well. So all of these schemes are created by central government with the aim of, you know, helping children in need, eliminating child poverty, giving children a better start in life, all that kind of thing. Unfortunately, when that's in common with all 4 of these schemes, when they created the eligibility criteria for the schemes, it was linked to claiming mainstream benefits. And by doing that, it was excluding probably the most deprived children in the UK. And the way that we bring these challenges is by kind of looking at the development of these types of schemes. And it does take quite a lot of work to kind of understand what was this considered, was this scheme created a lawful way? And what we found in all of those cases is that no recourse to public funds families weren't considered. There wasn't a kind of thought of, oh, what about migrant children? What about British children whose families can't claim mainstream benefit? It just wasn't a thing that was considered. And so, you know, this is, in my experience from those types of cases being brought, it kind of evidences the fact that this group of children are kind of a forgotten group, but actually they're the ones that are in most need in the country. And so some of the ways that we would challenge these is by saying that this, you know, the government's created these schemes with the purpose of helping children in need, but actually the way it operates frustrates the parliamentary intention, because it's not helping children most in need. It's not providing, you know, children in need with a healthy start in life or whatever, because they've forgotten about this group of people. And just in terms, so you were asking, sorry, I got my notes to go through. In terms of kind of other challenges that we see on the horizon, I mean, I think, you know, it's important that going forward, the government does properly consider this group of people, because they are, you know, it's clear that they're in need and they don't have the same support as other people in the country. And so, you know, creating schemes and creating packages of support aimed at eliminating child poverty or helping people in need, there needs to be kind of a, what about children with no recourse to public funds? What about these families? And I think, you know, where there's, I think I saw at one point in the report where there was kind of a response about local authorities exercising their discretion about when families would receive packages of support and that kind of thing. I think it's important to kind of understand that can be problematic in some ways, because different local authorities exercise discretion in different ways. And you know, if there would be a situation where you can see local authorities are not exercising their discretion in the right way, and it's detrimentally affecting people, a group of people specifically, then I think there could potentially be unlawfulness in the fact that there's no proper guidance as to how local authorities should be exercising that discretion or what they should be considering and that kind of thing. This is all quite vague. This is not legal advice. This is all kind of vague ideas about what could happen in the future. But you know, that's just kind of some of my kind of ideas from what I've read so far. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic bits and pieces that I've got to say about what I've seen so far. But yeah,
thank you so much, Olivia. Our next speaker is Carrie Swan. Carrie, can I ask you a question? Can you please explain why the safety net support that may be available from local authorities for children and families with no recourse to public funds may not be adequate in preventing child poverty, and why access to welfare benefits is a better resource in preventing destitution?
Thanks very much, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. As you said, I'm Carrie. I am a welfare rights advisor at Child Poverty Action Group. And I should say, first of all, that we're one of the organisations that believes the no recourse to public funds condition needs to end because it spells poverty for so many children living in the UK. But in the absence of that necessary change, we have made several recommendations about how we can better support those children. And one of those is the recommendation that we declassify child benefit as a public fund for immigration purposes. Obviously, as you know and have heard, the Work and Pensions Committee made the same recommendation in its report, at least in respect of the British children of parents with no recourse to public funds. So it's this recommendation about child benefit, or at least our broader version of that recommendation, that I'll focus on today. It really makes sense, I think, to compare child benefit to things like state-funded education, primary NHS treatment, entitlements for children which are not classed as public funds now, despite obviously being things that are publicly funded. We feel that's the right approach when it's children's entitlements and children's well-being and flourishing that we're talking about. We feel that's the right approach for NHS treatment, for state education, for free school meals, and for child benefit. And forgive me for sort of stating the obvious, but we are talking about meeting the basic needs of children. So not autonomous adult decision makers, but wholly dependent children who have had no choice about either where they were born or where they are now being raised. We're also talking about a time when 3/4 of all children in poverty in the UK have a parent who works. So despite what was suggested in the government's response to the Work and Pensions Select Committee report, despite what was suggested by the Minister for Welfare Delivery when he gave evidence, work is not an all-encompassing solution. And elsewhere, the government has acknowledged how important it is to have welfare benefits to top up the income of low-paid working parents. And it's not a complete solution either for the affected families to apply to have their condition lifted. As we've heard, families might not know about that right. They might not have access to independent advice, which is in limited supply. And even in successful cases, there are delays and complications. And we also know that acceptance rates plummeted last year. One of the things I've been asked is what the actual impact would be of extending child benefit to families with no recourse to public funds. Well, it would ensure one small but reliable source of income for every child in this country. By being universal, by being a benefit that can be claimed for every child, it would ensure clarity in a complex system. And as someone who kind of gives advice and answers questions for a living, can I urge you not to underestimate the importance of clarity and accessibility? And that's a point I'll come back to again shortly. I've also been asked about the cost of reclassifying child benefit. Child Poverty Action Group has estimated the cost at 160 million, and we think that is proportionate given how effectively that measure would target children who are at most at risk of living in poverty, even while their parents work. The Work and Pensions Committee described its recommendation on child benefit as affordable as well as appropriate, and we agree. And we also believe that the same is true if non-British children benefit from a change in the rules on child benefit. I've also been asked, in the absence of this measure, what other support might help bridge the gap for families affected by no recourse to public funds. And this is where I'll come back and I'll properly answer your question, because the obvious answer is improved statutory support from social services. So an improved version of the current arrangements that Olivia has just described so vividly. I have to say that from my point of view, improved statutory support is a poor second best to access to welfare benefits, in spite of what the government has claimed in its response to the report. Most families don't know that social services support is available, or how to ask for it, or I would say perhaps most importantly, what will be the consequences if they do ask for that support. This is all in the context of hostile environment policies. If the wrong person asks for support they're entitled to, they'll be reported to the Home Office as a matter of policy. Plus, Olivia's described, again, very vividly, the fraud approach, this aggressive and sceptical approach that many local authorities take to these requests. Can I also stress that any parent justifiably will be afraid of reporting to social services that they can't look after their child properly, even if that's because, you know, even if that's for financial reasons. They are essentially living in fear that a child will be removed from their care if they go and ask for that help. As someone who advises on benefits, it is very difficult to tell a parent that I simply don't know. I don't know if they can get financial assistance from their local authority. And I think we depart from the rule of law when we make someone's subsistence income the matter of so much uncertainty. Child benefit might not be a huge amount of money, that's true, but as something that's guaranteed, rights-based, clearly labelled and broadly well understood, as well as being central government funded, it has many advantages over social services support. And just before I finish, I would like to take issue with the final point that the government made in its response to the committee's recommendations on child benefit. So word for word, the response said, the general expectation is that those who can no longer financially support themselves and their families in the UK will return to their home country. So of course, return to your home country is not something you'd hope to hear anywhere in 21st century Britain. And of course, our government is forgetting that it is British national children whose rights it had been asked to consider. And this is their home country. But more than that, again, we are talking about keeping children out of poverty. And it is not children who decide where their families live. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, for your powerful speech. Really appreciate the work we're doing as well. I've just received a text that we're going to have a vote soon, so the MPs may have to leave the building. Well, leave where we are, not the actual building. Go and vote. So if I now move on to Nicole Massery. Nicole, we heard in the inquiry that the Migrant Victim Scheme pilot ended on the 31st of March 2022. We have also read in the government's response to the recommendation that 1.4 million has been provided for the year of 2022-23 in order to continue supporting migrant victims of domestic abuse. What has been your experience of the needs of migrant children and survivors of domestic abuse subject to NRPF, and what more needs to be done?
Thanks very much, Kay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me. Looking at the government's response to this report, I can see that they say, and I quote, that anyone who has suffered domestic abuse must be treated as a victim first and foremost, regardless of their immigration status. But I must say that those words ring particularly hollow for us when we view them against government's actions in relation to migrant victims of abuse. What we know is that government actually excludes migrant parents and children from the support of the welfare state, and in so doing, they deny them protection from abuse in the interests of maintaining strict immigration control policies. Government's response to migrant victims over the years has been piecemeal and inadequate. So the main government scheme for protecting migrant victims, which was referenced in the report, is now 20 years old. It's the so-called domestic violence indefinite leave route and its accompanying destitution domestic violence concession. That scheme is a real lifeline for the victims and survivors that are eligible under it. But even that route has its flaws and that create gaps in protection for the individuals that it's intended to support. But the biggest problem, however, is that there are countless migrant victims that fall outside of the scope of the protection of that scheme. And those victims, include migrant victims who might have temporary permission based on a family relationship with an abusive sponsor, or they might have temporary permission in the UK granted to them in their own right, such as students or workers. There are also, of course, those who require permission in the UK but don't have it at the present time, because they're often, we find, denied pathways to regularised status by perpetrators of abuse who use immigration status as a weapon of control and abuse. So domestic abuse doesn't just happen to migrants in certain visa categories. Domestic abuse happens to all migrants, and government's response to it must address all their circumstances. But the Support for Migrant Victims pilot that you've mentioned was set up and intended to gather evidence to inform government decision-making in this space. It was never necessary to gather that evidence because we all know what the problems are. And there are a range of possible solutions, which frankly the pilot has not been designed to consider. From our point of view, there are two outcomes that need to be achieved in order to bring about protection for migrant victims. Firstly, migrant victims need to be able to obtain an independent immigration status in the UK that is not tied to the perpetrator of their abuse. And secondly, migrant victims need to be eligible for housing assistance and other forms of financial support regardless of their immigration status. A comprehensive system of protection for migrant victims cannot only seek to achieve one or other of those things. There's no safety if migrant victims have got immigration status, but no access to housing and financial support from the state. And there's no safety if migrant victims are given temporary housing or financial support, but no route to obtain an independent immigration status. Government Support for Migrant Victims pilot has failed to achieve protection for migrant victims because it only seeks to address the problem of housing assistance and financial support. But we say that migrant victims are denied safety if they're also denied a legal status. Now, even insofar as it goes, the pilot is flawed because the features of it are such that they deter engagement by victims and the organisation trying to support them. So, for example, funding under the pilot scheme is only for a 12-week period. Migrant victims with no recourse to public funds conditions might have nowhere to go after a 12-week period unless local authorities agree to take over support. Furthermore, the funding that is provided under the pilot, the amount of funding simply doesn't cover the full accommodation costs and support for migrant victims. So as a result, what we're finding are those only organisations that can actually subsidise the government scheme through their own funds are able to support victims under that pilot. So when we look at what needs to be done, I would say that we really need urgent action now to support migrant victims of abuse. There are a range of possible solutions to address the issues that migrant victims and their children face, and I'll reference some of those that are priorities for rights of women. So firstly, first and foremost, we say that that scheme, the indefinite leave for victims of domestic violence route and the destitution domestic violence concession must be expanded to include more migrant victims. Secondly, we say that the government should act to comply with international obligations under Article 59 of the Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Girls, a convention that the government is now ratifying with an exemption in relation to Article 59. That if they complied with that, it would involve opening new immigration routes so that, for example, victims whose status depends on a partner or a parent can obtain independent immigration status when their relationship breaks down. And also those that don't have a dependent visa, but whose stay in the UK is nevertheless necessary due to their personal circumstances arising from the abuse, can also obtain an immigration status. For example, victims may need status to help them recover from the trauma of abuse, or they might wish to stay to cooperate with an investigation or criminal proceedings. Routes, a new immigration route like this should allow for access to public funds and should be offering settlement after a maximum period of 5 years, we would say. One of the big issues that victims face on fleeing abuse that we haven't mentioned yet is the fear of being removed. And that is a well-founded fear. Because not only do victims have the no recourse to public funds condition offered, but they're also frequently stripped of their immigration status on relationship breakdown, because the Home Office has powers which they exercise frequently to revoke leave if a person no longer satisfies conditions in relation to it. And domestic abuse often means that people no longer satisfy the conditions of their leave, for example, having a subsisting relationship or being able to attend courses. If you have to flee the local area, you might have to leave a particular job. It makes their status instantly revocable by the state. And we say that no one should have their leave revoked due to a change of circumstances arising from domestic abuse. That policy of revoking leave from victims of domestic abuse needs to end. And in addition to that, the pernicious immigration enforcement policies that deter victims from seeking safety must end as well. And that includes the practice of data sharing between police and immigration enforcement in relation to migrant victims. So that practice of sharing data harms victims, including children, who are deterred from seeking help and reporting crime to the police. But it also harms the public at large, who are not protected from the perpetrator of abuse, who continues to act undetected because of the failure to report crime. And of course, alongside others, we would say that victims of domestic abuse should never be denied access to public funds because of their immigration status. A scheme like the Government Support for Migrant Victims pilot is premised on maintaining the legal prohibition on public funds. Instead, what it does is it offers a limited short-term pot of money to contribute to some limited support. And we say that is not the right solution. The legal prohibitions on accessing public funds must be removed, including by allowing more people to apply to remove the no recourse to public fund condition on their leave, which obviously is a route only open to a small proportion of individuals. Finally, I would just end on saying, as others have, that rights and entitlements can be meaningless if they are not backed up by support to understand and access them. So many of the migrant victims we speak to have options to change their immigration status or access support that they simply cannot realise due to the lack of support available to them. What they need is often access to independent legal advice and support to enable them to secure their rights and entitlements. And at the moment, legal aid is currently only available to a subset of people who are eligible under the domestic violence indefinite leave route. What we say is instead, legal aid should be made and reinstated available to all migrant victims to help them understand their options and take necessary steps. I've probably gone over my time, so I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much for listening. If anyone has any questions, I'm of course happy to answer them alongside everyone else at the end.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm going to hand over now to Asfar. We have votes, literally, the bell's going to go. So I'm going to go and vote and then come back. But if Asfar, if you carry on, yeah? Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. And thank you, everyone. We're now going to hear from two members of United Impact, who are a group of 60 people with lived experience of having no recourse to public funds. United Impact's aim is to raise awareness and work with decision makers to create change so that families and children with NRPF do not have to endure poverty, hunger, homelessness, and further suffering. United Impact provided key extensive evidence to the committee last year as part of the inquiry into children living in poverty. We thank Temi and Francisca for being with us today to share their experiences and thoughts with us again. We will first be hearing from Francisca, and then we will be hearing from Temi. So welcome, Francisca. Would you just like to introduce yourself, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Hello, yes, my name is Francisca. Today I will be speaking on behalf of myself and United Impact. As we all have shared our similar stories each day, many times, we are happy to have meetings like this so we can all personally, talking about this is a bit of something, so whenever I talk about this, I go a bit emotional. Sorry about that. Yes. what we are going through because we don't think people understand. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the Work and Pension Committee for making recommendation to the government, which we have heard has all been rejected. I am a single mother of 2 children. I got Recourse to public funds recently, and I need to apply for benefit and housing. Me and my 2 children have been going through NRPF for 9 years. My son has been going through NRPF for his whole life because he's 8. I have been managing the last year on Project 17 support. My question is, why does the government care for some children and not all? Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca. So if I could just ask you, one of the recommendations from the committee to the government was that the government should give access to public funds after a maximum of 5 years. As you know, we've just learned that this has been rejected. What do you think about this, and how would this have improved things for children with families with NRPF?
Reducing NRPF for 5 years have helped a little bit, but I don't think NRPF policy should exist. Families with children should not have to suffer these situations. It doesn't make sense. We are pushed into poverty and cycle of debt the moment we are given NRPF. We have given so much evidence for the last 2 years about how hard it is to live with NRPF among the government should remove, I think the government should remove the stigma on children, because this parent's status, 5 years, it's long time, too long to suffer with NRPF. It is better, however, than the current situation of 10 years. It's up to me. If it is up to me, the government should just strip the NRPF among families with children. Yeah. Why put children and families through the stress of 5 years? Some people have been on the NRPF route for years and not knowing when it will end. I want to say something about surviving of domestic abuse with NRPF in my own situation. I didn't have verbal abuse, I didn't have physical abuse, but my ex-partner had status, but yet he refused to give me status. And due to that, I had to use his bank account. I had to rely on him. I couldn't do anything. And even up to now, my children don't have status yet. He has done so much to me. I shouldn't be speaking to him. But now, according to the law, I still need to speak to him in order to help my children get status, which I think is not fair, because I see it to be an abuse still, because I use his bank account. He knows what I spend, what I do, and that is stressful. And I blame all this on NRPF, because if they had just let me have my status without relying on him, I think me and my children would have been in a better situation than what we are in now. Even though I have Recourse now, I still have to rely on him. So I think that law needs to be stripped if it's possible. Thank you.
Next question is that the committee recommended to government to give child benefits to children who are British citizens. Can I just check that you can hear me, Francisca? I'm really sorry about the bell.
Yeah. Could you please repeat that question again, please?
Sorry, I've just muted you, Asfa. Could you maybe unmute whenever the bell's finished going? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think that's the bell for the vote. So we'll just take a little pause until that stops.
Sorry, Francisca, can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Apologies, that's the bell in the room which we don't control over. I just wanted to ask you, the committee recommended to government to give child benefit to children who are British citizens. And at the moment, this is around £21.80 a week for the first child. As you know, the government has rejected this. What difference would receiving child benefits have made to your children's welfare?
It would have made a lot of difference to my children's welfare because in regard my son had school trip coming up. And then it was last year, he was due to pay £210 for a 2-day trip. I couldn't afford it. And because he's not on child benefit, I couldn't be supported by the council also to help me, because apparently all that comes together. You need to be on benefit in order to even get all these necessary bits and pieces from the council, like support for trip. And my son couldn't go on the trip. They asked me to go to the school. The school too couldn't support because he is not on benefit. Then he wasn't on benefit. So then it wouldn't help. If my son had child benefit, it will help a lot. It will help in his school getting his school uniform, feeding him, helping him to have like all this bit of activities happening around to be able to take him out. I do take them to the park, but obviously can't be park every day running around. So if the government had given that child benefit to us, it would definitely help and improve me and my children's life and other women also. Thank you.
Thank you. And my next question is that in April of this year, the government agreed to permanently extend free school meals to all children in families with NRPF. And how has this made a difference to you and for members of United Impact?
It has made a lot of good difference, because as I said, my kids were not my kids were not on benefit, and as such, they were not on child benefit. My son and daughter both were not on child benefit, and it was quite difficult. So they agreeing to let the children have school meals have been very helpful to me. And I've heard from most of the moms and the dads on our page. They've also said good things about it. So it's a good idea, and we thank them for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just the last question is that the committee recognised that without access to benefits, when parents fall on hard times, families with NRPF can struggle to afford things like bills and essential things for their children without falling into debt. With the increasing cost of living, can you talk about how this is affecting you and members of United Impact?
It's affecting us a lot, because I am being given £112 a week to top up my electricity, feed my children, clothe my children, and that is stressful because the council only gives my landlord £100 to top up my light. That's when it's in winter. When it's summer, it's £70. And once that is finished, note that in my entire flat, it's all electric, everything is electric. So when that money finishes, I'm supposed to use the money from the £112 to top up electricity, which costs me about £100 will top up when it's cold, electricity. Then I'm left with what? Just few money for me to feed my kids. And now even going to Aldi to shop is not as cheap as before. So it's quite stressful to manage with the money that comes with the NRPF. It's very stressful. I can't get uniforms for my kids. I have to go, my son's jumper is £15 per one. And you know kids, they lose it. You write names, but they still lose it. They tear it, and then you need to get a new one. But thankfully, my son's school has the uniform bank. Sometimes you go there, they don't have his size. They don't have my daughter's size. So if not for the support of United Impact and Project 17, who have been supporting me, last year, they didn't even have jacket for winter. It was Project 17 that helped me buy them common jacket that children need. Just necessity, something that the child really needs to have. It's cold here, I couldn't afford it. They had to help me. So without them, I wouldn't be able to do it. So in regards to that, it's not been easy. The bills, the food, just the necessities. This is not like you're looking for money to go on holiday. The smallest thing to even get for your own kids is difficult. So it's really difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisca, for that and for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you too.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Temi. Hello, Temi, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, I was attending to the children.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Temi. I'm also here today to speak about my own experience on behalf of United Impact and all family with NRPF. Thank you.
Thank you, Temi. My first question is that during the pandemic, government agreed that families with 2-year-olds on Section 17 support could access free childcare. How has this helped you?
Oh, I have two children, a baby and a 3-year-old. I have not yet been able to get any childcare for my 3-year-old child since he was born. Parents with NRPF are suffering from a lot of tension, which is true. We don't get moments to cry. We can't take the pressure on our NRPF. If the kid can go to childcare, the parents will have a lot of personal time to reflect on our situation and to console ourselves before the children get back. Most families with NRPF live in one of small room in shared accommodation. Our children are with us 24/7. For children in small shared accommodation, they have no space to play. It makes parent tense, which is not health children. Being in nursery children, so being nurturing the children can play with other children, learn and develop. It's very difficult in a small apartment. Small room. Thank you.
Thanks, Temi. The next question is, what difference would it make to have access to free nursery school places when your child is 3 or 4 years old for 30 hours a week in terms of helping you to find work and stay in work?
Yes, for family with NRPF, they should be entitled to get 3 and 4 years old childcare. So parents can work. It is good having it for 2 years olds, but when the children are 3 and 4, it's so important for them to be in structured childcare environment. For parents to be able to work to improve our life situation, very important as well. Childcare should be equal so that parents can do things with their lives and contribute to the system. The government wants us to work, but how can we pay for childcare with the little money we get? We want to work. Yes, we really want to work, but how can we do it? People with NRPF want to do care development course, and it's so frustrating not being entitled to join this. This is part of what is going on now. You know, I just feel for those people that they are not entitled to all this. Sorry, the job center told me that as I now receive universal credit since I got my status, I can get access to free childcare. I was so shocked and happy about it. I have to, sorry about it. I have told the job center I want to do course. If I can get childcare, I am really looking forward for it. It is relieving to have it is relieving to have sometimes not with the children, some freedom so you can do something for yourself. It can do this. If I can do this course, it will help me gain a qualification to find work more, especially others to be able to access this too by having equal childcare. It is equal childcare. Bills are high and we need to work. Having free childcare will enable us to progress our qualification and to improve our chance to finding work. This is healthier for parents and children. Thank you.
Thanks, Temi.
I think, Temi, you need childcare now.
The next question is about the fact that the committee recommended to the government that they should give more financial support to local authorities to support families with NRPF. But as you know, the government has rejected this. Do you think it would help if they gave more support, more financial support to local authorities?
Yeah. For money, answer. For money should be given to local, more money should be given to local authority. It will really help. They could give one family one house, a comfortable area, not sharing accommodation. They should be able to do more for us if they had more money. If they have money, if they don't have enough funding, it will remain the same. When the council gives you Section 17 property or housing property, you can't even view the property. You are given and usually have to move in 1 day's notice. Yeah. I know from hearing story in United Impact that a lot of property are very bad indeed, but it is the importance of living somewhere where you are scared for the health of the child. So many family lives in a property where other tenants are constantly using drugs. For my example, yes, there is no space for our children. There is black mode and down. So many flights of stairs. Most of us are single mothers. There have been some dangerous situations. When we got accommodation, my boys were so happy. So this is so emotional for me. I remember. My boys were so happy. They could run around compared to where we are in the shared accommodation. In the shared accommodation with 6 people, sharing a toilet, kitchen, we were just in one room. It really changed our lives a lot. I can now access benefits, so the financial support I receive has increased a bit, although it goes on the bills. Since I got because I live alone, we can live comfortably. You don't have to share with anyone. I hope the government can give this to other families. It's very important because I know where I was coming from. If they don't have leave to remain, the government should be able to help us more. They need to at least pump money into local authorities so that the children do not have to have such poor quality of life. Because when the children don't have anything, it will show in them. Because when they go to other people's places, it will show, like my son example. We don't have any furniture. When we went to one of the places, it shows. That's why I struggle that I have to get furniture in the house. He was jumping on their furniture there, sitting on the chair because we haven't got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Temi. We can all hear how hard it is for you to recount and share your story. So I'll just say thank you very much for that. I have one last question. If you feel you can answer that, but if you can't, then that's fine too. But I just wanted to ask you how the cost of living rise has affected you.
It has affected me a lot. I have to buy fresh milk Pampers, electric, it's so expensive. I own the electric company money. Every month I tell them I can't afford, I can only afford £50. I own many bills. I own the water bills, £500. They said if I don't pay, they will take me to court, which is scary. I said I will pay £30 a month.
Okay.
We bat twice a week, which is very good, which is very true. But we bath twice a week to save money, as I can't afford energy price. The NRPF policy should be removed. Some people can't work. Also, single people are affected. It is not just family. Some people are on medication and unwell. People really need the welfare system. The cost of living is going to go up in October again, and we can't afford life at the moment. And they are making it harder for people. If people can't get recourse to public fund, it will if we can't get recourse to public fund, it will separate a lot of family and make our children suffer even more than they are suffering already. I told my energy provider I get universal credit. They said I can get a discount of 5%, but will NRPF, you can't get it. I want to say something about the impact of my mental health and the mental and physical health of many members of United Impact. We try to hide our emotions from our children. My son is 3 years old. If I hurt myself, he comes and touch it and say, sorry, mommy. They don't want to see me cry. I don't want to show my emotion, but sometimes you can't you lose it due to all the pressure on us. We know how it feels to have NRPF. It is not an easy thing. My children is saying sorry to me, trying to cheer me up. Children shouldn't have to feel this way. In United Impact, I have heard from parents who have all had different type of experience when I hear about what other people have been through. It is too much. We are all facing a lot. By the time we eventually get our leave to remain of resource, we have depression. We're taking medication. So you can't even walk due to the medical issue caused by having NRPF, the trauma and the stress you've been through. For me, sometimes I discriminate because of what I have been through. I have memory loss. I even wonder how I will cope at work. It really adds. Sorry, it really adds because all this trauma I have been through. I am just trying to calm my body down. Other parents have physical illness because by the stress of NRPS, and our children are so traumatized as well. The government really needs to look to that. So the government really needs to look to that and do something for us. This is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you very much, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Temi. And I've got my MP hat on, and I think you need some advice with the amount of money that you're having to pay out, which wasn't my intention, but I think we need to talk to you offline if we can. I'm not sure who your MP is. I'm not sure where you live. We've not met, but I'm a bit concerned about the amount of money you're paying out every month when you don't have a lot of money coming in. But that's a separate issue. But thank you so much. Thank you for all the Temi, we can talk offline. We've got your contact details. So don't worry now, because I know baby wants your attention. So don't worry. Don't worry. But now, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that has made a contribution today, and thank you for being with us whilst we go and vote and bearing with us. This is one of the joys of being back in Parliament and having to physically go and vote. We have to move around, which we could do without, but because we were able to do it from home during the lockdown. So again, it just shows you things can be very different if somebody wants them to be different, as in who's in charge. But I'm now going to move on to Q&A session. I'm not sure about MPs on the line, if there are any MPs, but I have Kate Green here. I'm not sure if Kate has a question for any of the speakers.
I don't have a question, but Stephen and I were talking during the voting about opportunities in Parliament to keep raising the issue and particularly pushing the government on the recommendations in this committee's report. And I was just talking to Stephen about the next opportunity that we both identified is that the Public Accounts Committee will be holding a session with work and pensions officials pretty soon, we think, Stephen, in the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think it is, which will be another opportunity for us to ask them some questions. So we should keep the pressure on the government, given that Stephen's committee's report is, of course, a cross-party report, and that makes it much stronger.
Yes.
We're trying to encourage the government to relax some of the constraints.
Thank you, Kate. That's really good. As you rightly said, we have to look at all opportunities as they arise. So the Public Accounts Committee looks at really value for money on certain schemes. So I think sometimes we have to look at the bare bones of anything and see where we can hook it into something else and talk about you know, the lived experience and what it really looks like, lack of understanding when it comes to authorities and those that are working in the authorities not understanding how to exercise it. So